Well, it's fun to come to this portion in the conference. What a wonderful job by our speakers. Will you join me in thanking them? John, I'm going to begin with you. You are our leader. You can grab a microphone and we can pass that along on the side. John, have you been happy with this event? And what are your thoughts on this gathering of the Gospel Reformation Network?
Hello?
Yeah, you're good.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, very, very encouraged. To be able to work with a group of friends, ministers, like the ones on this platform. It's going to be solid, faithful, pastoral, theologically sound, and that's what we've received, I think, this week. And I've heard a lot of encouragement from those who have attended, and the singing has been rousing. So thankful for John Haynes and his leadership there, and Briarwood has done a marvelous job of welcoming us.
John, when we get together, one of the things that I always appreciate about you is that you encourage the elder, the minister, to pursue Christ and to be a man of Christian piety. Would you speak with us just a little bit as we reflect on the lessons of pastoral piety today?
Yes, thank you, Mel. I think it was a few years ago that we focused on that subject for a year in the GRN materials and website. And pastoral piety is really at the heart of what we're trying to communicate to the PCA. We've seen a waning of it, I think, over time. I think there's a lot of distractions for us, but the impulse of the Christian life is to spend time with God. And I remember as a new Christian, how I longed to just spend time in the Bible and read good books, and it's really all I wanted to do in those early days. And I think sometimes being in the pastorate, that can be lost. We can, crazy enough, get too busy for God while we're in the ministry. And we are to be Christians first, and then pastors. We are to be sheep first and then shepherds. We're always to remember that the ministry, sometimes people will say things like, well, John, when do you get your spiritual nourishment? Because I know you're working on the Lord's Day, so how are you encouraged? I say, I'm under the same ministry of the word that you are. I'm partaking of the Lord's Supper just as you are. I am being nourished and encouraged and strengthened on the Lord's Day as you are. And so that's central to my piety, is Lord's Day observance and receiving the means of grace that I'm administering on the Lord's Day. It's not as if I look for it somewhere else rather than in my own congregation. But I think that Joel Beakey's emphasis, which we see emphasized in the Puritans, is helpful. We have personal piety, family piety, and corporate piety. And as ministers, we ought to pursue all of those. We ought to spend time with God daily, putting on the armor of God, reading the scriptures, bowing our heads in prayer, seeking God. Like Psalm 63 says, I hunger and thirst after you as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. Reading devotional material, reading good books, by RHB and the Banner of Truth and elsewhere, good biography. These are important parts of our personal piety. Family piety. I never feel like more of a man and more of a husband and more of a leader than when I'm sitting with my family in my living room, Bible open, reading the scriptures, exhorting my kids, encouraging my wife, praying together, singing psalms and hymns together. That is something I think that's missing even in a lot of ministers' homes these days, and it needs to be recovered. It's such an encouragement to our own souls. And then, of course, the corporate piety side. So piety should be at the center of what we understand as the ministerial calling.
Thank you, John. We have a veritable feast of Presbyterian ministers up here, and I want to hear from each of you today. I want us to go briefly down the row. Jason, we'll begin with you if you could apprehend that wireless. I'd like for each of you to tell us something that you're reading or that you've recently read that's been helpful. Give us one snippet of something that you're reading or have recently read that would be beneficial to the people.
Yeah, we were just talking about this with our staff at Universal Reformed Church. We're working through Carl Truman's recent book on critical theory, and it's just been a wonderful book to work through, especially for our staff. We're in a college setting, and this is rife throughout our culture, but especially our young people are imbibing this and don't even know it, and he does a wonderful job of just diagnosing it and walking you through how these things have come together. It's been helpful for our staff. It's been helpful for us as we're trying to be equipped in these things that have come on in a rush so that we can equip our people to understand these things well.
Thank you, Jason. Kevin?
Yeah, we read that, and our staff, The Making of the Modern Self by Carl Truman. We're reading right now a book by Thaddeus Williams from Biola on social justice, which I think is really good, trying to say what are good impulses in biblical justice, and also critiquing what's wrong with how social justice is often conceived of today. We're doing that. I read in the 3 volumes of John Murray, somehow I'd missed before, there's like a 180-page biography of John Murray from Ian Murray. Banner, you got to pull that out and be a separate Banner book. So that was really good to read, and I'm reading another Banner book. I'm reading through the 2 volumes of David Calhoun on Princeton Seminary, and then one other, not a Christian book, but any good biography written well can teach you things about yourself. So I really commend Andrew Roberts' big biography of Winston Churchill, which came out a couple of years ago. I listened to a good part of it on Audible so I could get through it. It's like 1,000 pages. It's really, really well done. And there's so many parts I thought, oh, I'm learning something just about myself and human beings, and let alone history, just by a really good biography of someone.
Thank you, Kevin. David?
I've just finished, I've been remiss in not getting to this earlier, but just finished the 2nd volume of Dallamore's 2 volumes on Whitfield. They're both magnificent. And so that's really helpful. And I devoured, one of my mentors was Donald MacLeod of the Free Church of Scotland, and so Scottish theology. And also his recent little book on the free offer of the gospel, Compel Them to Come In. Donald can be quirky and journalistic and provocative, and that's part of why I love him. And his prose, it's a masterclass in how to write well theologically and pastorally. And especially the second of those 2, Compel Them to Come In, made me want to preach. And that's a good book for me if it makes me want to get up and call sinners to come to Christ. So,
Harry?
This is what we're now reading. Oh,
More
okay.
recently.
Well, I've done a deep dive. Maybe it kind of came through a little bit last night, but I've done a deep dive into Machen because of my study of progressive Christianity, and I believe, and having come to a conviction that the supremacy of the Scripture is ultimately under attack in progressive Christianity and Christian liberalism. It was through the inerrancy denying sufficiency, and progressive is through sufficiency denying inerrancy ultimately. But having done that, I commend the biography. I've read Hart, Daryl Hart's Defending the Faith, and then give me the title. I can't remember the title, but I've just started into the republication of the various addresses that Machen did, and it's now, what's the title, Dave? We've just published it at Westminster.
Radio address. Things unseen.
That's it. Oh, I've just started. That is so rich, and that's been greatly helpful. I try to read regularly out of the 4 volumes on John Murray, just on a regular basis. I try to do that. My devotional that I'm doing right now I highly recommend it. It's from one of the Puritans called Morning Exercises by Reverend William J. And there's a kind of a New American Standard version of it that would help you if Puritanese is a little bit of a difficulty for you. And so those are the things that I am right now devoted in. But one that I've just finished that really ties in, I told David I really felt his address was an up-to-date reprise of Samuel Miller's book, Doctrinal Integrity, that I'm hoping one of our publishing companies is going to republish. Doctrinal Integrity, where he develops how our vows to the standards really is the profession of faith of a gospel minister. And I highly recommend that book to you.
John?
Just read Vodi Bachum's new book, Fault Lines, which is a kind of 1-2 punch against the social justice movement taking place today. He is fair in the book. He footnotes it heavily with various reading he's done. I'd say it's a good book to take a look at and to read. I've been back in Of Sin and Temptation by John Owen, in part preparing for our time here. Also, Andrew Roberts has become one of my favorite authors. I read Churchill and been recommending to everybody. And I'm now in Napoleon. I agree with what Kevin has said. It doesn't need to be just Christian biography that we read and learn from. There are writers like Roberts who help us to reflect upon our own lives and leadership. Just a few other things. But
Fred, other than Robert's Rules of Orders, what are some of the new books you've been reading lately?
I have been reading with a group of young men, and not so young men in our congregation, J.C. Ryle's Practical Religion.
Yeah.
And that has been of benefit to me, first because Ryle is excellent, and secondly because he, it's like he sees down into your soul and grabs a hold of you. But the other thing that's been encouraging to me is, as my wife will testify to, I am a glass half empty kind of guy. I tend to be discouraged at times. And when you read Ryle, you're saying to yourself, did he write this last week? This problem that he's recognizing, it's with us right now. And I think it's helpful. It's one of the reasons why biographies are helpful, is because you realize now is not the worst time ever in the history of the world to be a Christian. It's like what it's like to be a Christian throughout all of history. And the problems repeat themselves because people are sinners. And so I really, really have enjoyed going through that.
David?
One of the things about this conference actually has been such a blessing to me is, if you have sat and listened to what we've heard this last couple of days, it's not just a criticism after one after another. This has been a very constructive and encouraging set of talks. And to that end, I have recently gone back to Old Princeton myself and have been reading Samuel Miller. And there's multiple places you can find this, but I've been going through the 2-volume set of some of the great content that please go back and read. It is incredibly pertinent to our situation here and now. So I've been very much delighting in that. A second book of a very different ilk I just sent to the members of the board at Westminster. And that is a book by Pierce Hibbs. Some of you have begun to read Pierce over the last several years. He's been writing a lot. This is by far his best book. It's called The Book of Giving, and it is actually a study of the intra-Trinitarian relations of God as it relates to how that impacts us as the people of God. It is written brilliantly, accessibly, and delightingly. So read it. I strongly encourage it.
Just a few weeks ago, David Calhoun, a beloved historian within the PCA, longtime faculty member at Covenant, went home to be with the Lord. He recently released Swift and Beautiful, the amazing stories of faithful missionaries. It's a very accessible missionary biography book, some of whom have lived very recently. And I would commend that to you. Dr. Reeder, for what purpose do you rise?
I have a friendly amendment. I left one out that I love the book that was just put out, Taking RC's, a very useful exposition of the confession, and James Boyce's Foundations of the Faith.
Truths we confess.
Truths we confess on the RC, and Foundations of the Faith on Jim Boyce. But my pastoral mentoring group, I am walking through Sinclair Ferguson's, and some as pastors and teachers. That is a gold mine.
Really good.
Please take advantage of
I think
that.
Ligonier has just adapted the Truths We Confess into a one volume as well. John? That is a giveaway.
We gave that away at our luncheon last year, I think, or 2 years.
That's right. David, you are an academic dean at one of our beloved seminaries that feeds into the life of the PCA. We've spoken some the last few days about progressive tendencies. Speak to us about what you're seeing in terms of the type of men that are, particularly thinking about men going into the MDiv track. Is this something that you see as an academic dean? And is there anything about it that we shouldn't be alarmed about? Is there something we should learn from some of the new tendencies we see of seminary students?
Well, let me frame my answer first by, I think one of the great privileges of serving at an institution like Westminster, RTS, Greenville, any of those places, is that we actually get a window into the promises of God being fulfilled. When Christ says he is going to build his church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, he actually also, each generation, provides the leaders, the officers, as Ephesians 4 points out, that God not only gives gifts to men, but those officers of the church are his gift to the church. And so we get to taste of that day in and day out, year in after year after year. So I actually have perhaps an overly optimistic view about the future of the church because of that privilege. With that said, I would also say that I think our students come in with a great deal of even just academic lacking from past generations, just with the nature of way public education and university education has gone. But I would say, coupled with that, I'm tremendously encouraged by the zeal for addressing these sorts of issues head on. And we're really seeking to help our students think through these things biblically and be able to speak to them boldly and articulately.
Kevin, from the RTS perspective, would you weigh in on that?
Well, I just feel so privileged, and I mean, it may be self-selecting. They're at RTS, they're in my class, and all the other, good professors. They're at Christ Covenant. I feel like student after student, I'm excited that you're going into ministry. We have 9 or 10 pastoral interns at our church that meet with different pastors, and I meet with every 2 or 3 weeks, and we got one with us here, and I just think I'm excited for each and every one of you to go into ministry. Not that they won't have challenges and make mistakes, but the questions that I get in class are good. I don't feel like men are coming in with axes to grind. They're eager to learn. They want to have the Reformed faith. They want to do it in a winsome way. So we need to be really thankful. And I remember hearing Don Carson say, after 40 years of teaching at Trinity, he was saying those last 5 or 10 years, he felt like he had never had as good a students as he had. Just hungry, not upset about the historic Christian faith. So there's so many reasons to be encouraged with the sort of students that are coming to our seminaries, being produced, and that hopefully we have an opportunity to build into.
Kevin, I'm going to keep it with you for just the next question. Part of the context of this conference is the human sexuality debate. Partly, you have dealt with that along with Brian Chappell, who's in the room, and others. Would you speak to us a little bit about the report that you are a part of, and what's maybe a big idea that you want us to take from that?
Yeah, hopefully Tim Keller and I might have it. Tim's undergoing cancer treatment, so he won't be able to be at GA, but hopefully we might have an opportunity for the two of us to record something and show something, because we were we were going to do that last year. And if you haven't read the report, again, as Harry said about the report, he was a part of, I am partial to it. I think it's a good report, and in particular, the preamble and the 12 statements. You know, our Presbyterian reports can be very long, and they're helpful to some degree, but we really wanted to say, with those 12 statements at the beginning that makes about 6 pages, you could read through these with your session. You could walk through them in one Sunday school class, and we really wanted to have a statement and then a nevertheless, which is just trying to provide the nuance. Here's what we're not saying this, because I do think sometimes we can talk past each other where there may be agreements, but we're sensitive to different dangers on different sides. And so, I mean, I would say you can look at the 7 names who are on that committee, and there's different people who have different inclinations and lean in different ways. But I do want to commend Brian if he's still here. He led the group very well, very effectively, very fairly, and got us to the heart of the issue. And I think all of us were pleasantly surprised on all that we were able to agree on, and in particular in those 12 statements, which we went through many times, dozens of hours. The rest of the report was important too, but it's kind of a report, it's kind of a canon within a canon, because those 12 statements we did go through line by line and said, okay, we got to find a different word there, and we really wanted to draw from the best of our Reformed theology. So there's lots of footnotes to the Confession, to Turretin, to Owen, to say, you know, in a lot of ways, the sexuality stuff, same-sex attraction, that's a new discussion, but it's really about Reformed anthropology and a Reformed doctrine of sanctification. And it's all there. It's all there in Turretin already, and in our confessions. So it was a lot of work, and I'm pleased with what we were able to produce, and hopefully we'll serve the church.
David Strain, we've gotten this question in different ways from a number of different men. I'm going to send this one to you. A man who's here, he's a teaching or ruling elder. He's in a presbytery in which he feels that he's alone confessionally. And he described his presbytery as having a view of subscription lower than good faith subscription. He's asking for practical advice. What should he do?
There's multiple levels of that. There's the feeling alone piece, and there's the being a presbyter. And sometimes being a good presbyter might mean that, at least in terms of the brothers nearest to him geographically, he'll continue to be a little bit alone. I do think that one of our temptations in situations like that is to see our job as always to go to war. And so pick your battles really carefully, decide which hills you have to die on, and before you go to war, serve on a, unglamorous committee. Like Fred was urging with regards to the courts of the church.
It has controversies that need to be dealt with.
No doubt, but even at the presbytery level, do something with other elders,
Sometimes you miss.
teaching and ruling, that you can stand with them, and they may come to see you a little differently. They may have labeled you, and when you know them and they know you, you can disagree, but the temperature of the disagreement can be better. So you've got to work at the relational piece, and you've got to pick your battles. But the aloneness thing, I think many of us have experienced that over the years, where we feel like our deepest affinities are not with the people closest to us geographically, and we feel isolated. Jason spoke about our company of pastors and Twin Lakes Fellowship. Those are non-geographically dependent and will provide, as they have for me, as they have for some of us on this platform and many of us in this room, a home, a network of deep friends. My closest brothers in ministry are Twin Lakes Fellowship men and my Band of Brothers men.
Indeed.
And in many ways, I'm still in the ministry because of them, under God.
Yeah.
And I'm able to go to Presbytery and to General Assembly and to labor and to be a churchman because I am not, maybe it's wrong of me to say it this way, but I think we can be naive in expecting that the structures that are a given, Presbytery and Assembly, should be the places of our deepest friendships and affinities. And then when they're not, it's terribly disappointing.
Yeah. I'm going to shift from, thank you for that, I'm going to shift to Fred now. Fred, we've got a number of questions about the SJC. Apparently, it's a very mysterious topic in our audience today. So I'll give you a really technical one and then kind of a broad one. What does the SJC do? That's the technical question. And then more specifically, why does the SJC seem to defer to lower courts when theological matters are before them? Could you answer those succinctly for us?
So let me start with the initial technical question. The SJC is the commission of the General Assembly. So what that means is, just like when a man is ordained by a presbytery, the whole presbytery doesn't go to the church. They appoint a commission to be the presbytery at the ordination service. And so the SJC serves in terms of our graded courts and discipline as the General Assembly. Now you may say, well, why is that? You told me, Fred, there's only 24 men. And that's because I think, at least wisely, our fathers in the PCA determined that it would not be efficient and or well done to have the assembly deal with cases. Now,
there was a time where we did that.
Now, for example, this year alone, I have read in excess of 3,000 pages of a record of the case, some of which is very technical and having to deal with various issues, including things like the study committee report and parsing things out. And it just seems to me it's not realistic to expect 1,500 men to read thousands of pages and then have a reasoned debate in the assembly. Now, the SJC is still accountable because we have vows and we're elected. So that's the purpose that we serve. With respect to why there's deference, I think in some measure it's built into our version of Presbyterianism. So if I can, there's a little bit of inside baseball here, but you all know that there's somewhat of a difference between the PCA and the Orthodox Presbyterian Church in our form of government, not culture. And so the PCA is often referred to as a grassroots Presbyterianism or a bottom-up Presbyterianism, with courts not acting for lower courts. That is baked into all of our book, including things as important as congregations own their property and presbyteries can never steal it from them, as happens in the mainline church, even today. And what that means is that view of looking at Presbyterianism has higher courts reluctant to act for lower courts or to speak for them on the things that are closest. Now, the area of most controversy about there is theological issues, because when you're talking about the credibility of a witness or testimony, it's clear you go down. Yeah. And so there is a debate, even within the SJC, as to what it means to interpret the Constitution and to give deference. That's not unlike you will see all the time in our United States Supreme Court. And almost, if you're a follower of things like the U.S. Supreme Court, the side that gets to set the test for the case often determines the outcome of the case. And that can be. And so I would just encourage you, there are good men that I serve with, men who I vote with every meeting, and men who I vote on the opposite side of every meeting, and we enjoy each other's company, and we fellowship together. I appreciate your prayers. We try not to do things in secret, but we also try to protect the rights of people, and especially ministers who are in process. So I'm not sure that's completely satisfying.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Jason now. Jason, one topic that's been asked by a number of men is the notion of mortification of sins. And we're having conversations in the PCA about heinous sins, what our confessional language speaks of heinous sins. The question is, how do you tell if someone is really mortifying a heinous sin? And I think the question has in view an ordained officer, a deacon, an elder, serving under authority within the church. So let me relate that in the abstract down to you in the personal. In your church setting, a man has had, or a woman has had, a heinous sin. Previously, he or she has served. How do you as a pastor assess their progress in their faith, not in a triumphalistic fashion, but in a progressing way? How do you assess how they're doing? And what are the criterias to allow them to serve again or not to serve again?
Yeah, that is a difficult question that we all have to wrestle with as pastors and elders in our own local context. It's something that we're obviously wrestling with as a denomination regarding different things, and we all do in our presbyteries, chair our church and ministerial welfare committee, and we're often dealing with this even in our own presbytery. You know, I think at the base, we have to say it comes down to walking alongside of that man or that woman. We will often, as a session at University Reformed Church, when we have someone that falls into a heinous sin, and we place that person under discipline. So for instance, if they are dealing with a case now where someone will be suspended from the table, we always put together a care plan that surrounds that person. So where there are multiple layers where we are walking alongside of them and continuing to minister to them. So there are different check-in points with different people that would have different perspectives into this person's life. That then you have multiple avenues that are reporting back to the session as a whole that, yes, this person has indeed, we see this improvement in their life here. We see this commitment to Christ here. We see this delighting in Christ here. We see that they have remained pure in this area here. And it's coming from different corridors. So, you know, that could be a couple of men that are assigned, for instance, to meet with this person individually, to ask the hard questions. Could be somebody that's reading a book with them over here. It could be that they have a small group leader that is reporting on their involvement in the small group. But different mechanisms like that with different people that are part of a holistic care team, I think, is incredibly helpful on a local level. It gets more complex, it seems like to me, at a denominational level with some of the things that we're talking about. And we continually have to, I think, work through our courts of the church at those smaller levels as much as we can, because those are the people that know the people, and encouraging that.
Just a few more questions, gentlemen. Harry, this is a reminder that we've got folks from all sorts of perspectives here with us today. A person has written in response to some of the personal piety talks that we had yesterday that it's just really hard to do devotions for 30 minutes at a time. How would you encourage a person who's struggling to pursue the Lord and the length is an intimidating thing to them to hear?
So when I was converted, somebody put into my hands the 2 volumes of that David mentioned on Arnold Dallimore, which was life-changing for me. I try to read about 6 biographies a year, and that was one of the most profound things. And of course, I read that he got up, I think it's probably about 4 o'clock in the morning, had a 3-hour devotion, So I said, well, I guess that's what I ought to do. And it really didn't last. I don't think I got past the first day. In fact, I don't think I got past the first 10 minutes. And then somebody put in my hands what I give to every member that joins Briarwood when they come through the Pastor's and Choirs class. It's a little thing put out, I think it was Navigators that first wrote it. It's called 7 Minutes with God. And the idea is, let's start here and build. And so that's what I do. And then I try to give helpful instruments to them, and they plan. And then I try to encourage them to build so that every 5 years you read through the Bible in your devotional life. That's 3 chapters a day, 20 minutes a day, pretty much. So, in other words, we try to build up to it. And that's pastorally how I handle that. I will say this. So a little bit, I can't remember who said what about it somewhat resonated. But people ask me, and I'm doing William J. right now. I love table talk. I put that in the hands of people. I try to give them 7 minutes with God. Then the next year, I try to get table talk, or I get them introduced to it during the year. But one of the things in my personal life, I hope nobody brings charges up here, but on Monday, my devotions are the text I'm going to preach that next Sunday. Now, I know everybody, you are not supposed to use your sermon prep time as your devotional time. Well, let me tell you, I'm not. What I'm trying to do is, before I stand to pastorally preach that text to my people, I want to have preached it to myself intentionally. So I'll do the Sunday morning, on Monday, and I do the Sunday night on Tuesday, and then I'm back to William J. or Table Talk or whatever it is.
Fathers and brothers and conferees, what a delight it's been to be with you this week. I wish we could go on all afternoon. John, we have an event scheduled again after General Assembly in Greenville. Remind us the date on that.
Yes, it'll be September the 25th, Greenville, South Carolina. It'll be a day together for concerned Presbyterians. All REs and TEs are welcome to attend.
How would you describe what we're going to do at that event?
Yeah, it's been asked, how will that be different than this, what we've been doing here? This has been more of a conference setting, talks on various subjects to encourage you in your ministries and in your piety. And it's going to be more of a forum. Of course, you'll hear from some of the leaders of the GRN, but it'll be a time also to discuss a positive way forward, to consider what ways we can serve within our presbyteries and within a General Assembly, to receive wisdom on that regard, and to continue the momentum that we have seen begun here this week.
Thank you, John. We've had a number of questions about the conference broadcast. It's our intention to get those edited and then up online just as soon as we can. I just can't thank Harry, you and your church again enough for what you've done for us. It's been extraordinary to work with the Briarwood folks, and it's also been a joy to be with each of you this week. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope if you've come with your sessions or with leadership or ministry people that it's produced good conversations. We are hopeful for the PCA, and I think each man on this stage is desirous to work for God's glory in it and through it. And we hope to be able to gather again in Greenville and in other settings in the months to come.